am the director of the Alliance for Nonprofit Impact. I wanted to say, to start with, I know this has been a crazy month since the new administration took over. We appreciate the work that you do and know that it is not easy in the current environment. So we want to make sure that you have all the information that you need to be able to navigate this time of uncertainty and lots of questions. So we're going to start off talking about what is happening at the federal level. And, oh, there's Miriam. Excellent. So we'll talk about what's happening at the federal level, and Miriam will give us some updates on litigation. And then we are going to talk some about the state level near the end, but we will have time for questions. We are thrilled that the Alliance has been able to partner with the Lawyers Committee for Rhode Island, which is a new organization designed to support our communities in the challenges that they're facing right now with the new administration. So Miriam Weizenbaum is heading that group up. She was previously the director of the civil division at the Attorney General's office. Is that correct?
Yeah, the chief of the civil division, yeah.
And now she's in private practice. And we are really grateful to have had her expertise and partnership as we go through this. So first, I just wanted to let Miriam share some overall perspective on kind of where we are in the litigation space and any guidance or insights she might have for nonprofits as we try to navigate that. We are going to be doing a workshop for nonprofits who are receiving direct federal funding next week. So we'll have some time to talk about that as well in partnership with the Lawyers Committee. But we'll first start just by talking about kind of where we are and what nonprofits really need to know about litigation and the status of things from the executive orders. So Miriam, I will turn it over to you.
Hi. Okay, Nancy may have overbilled me a little because it's such a complex and changing landscape that there's only so much update I can give. But let me start, and really that's what we're going to be doing at the event on March 4th is giving an update from both a practitioner in federal grants and compliance, and also somebody is going to be coming in from Democracy Forward, which is doing a lot of the litigation. So plug for that, but I'm assuming that not everyone can just drop everything and make it with a week's notice. So so also check back. So I think there are a few highlights. One is that there have been some wins. And let me tell you kind of what I mean by that. These larger legal organizations have brought cases at the trial court level, which is where the cases start, arguing that the court has to exercise its power to immediately stop or enjoin some actions by the administration. Let's just call it generally stopping funding. And a number of those have been successful with contours that are less than clear. So yay that the courts have said there are limitations on what the administration can do. The fact that it is less than clear is not because, it's not entirely because the court has balked and said, well, we're not going to go that far. To some extent, that's true, but I think it's just the actions have been so enormous that that it's difficult for a court to sort of get its arms around all the permutations. So the reason I'm making that distinction is because I don't want people to lose heart. Like, well, it's enjoying, but they're still doing it. The administration's still doing it, which is absolutely true. Yes, that is true, but successes can build on each other, and so don't lose heart. The reason we created the Lawyers Committee for Rhode Island is because we knew that as wonderful as these big organizations are, the reality is on the ground. And so if there aren't lawyers to respond to the on the ground in all the crevices where the water goes, then the laws are meaningless. So that's why we've created this resource for Rhode Island, and we're building it out as quickly as we can to provide that support. So as far as, like what was enjoined, again, broadly speaking, as it pertains to nonprofits, there have been these executive orders that directed termination, certification, and threatened enforcement action around DEI, such a vague term, and the gender, area. What the court held last week is that each of those actions, termination, certification, enforcement, threat, violate the First Amendment because they implicate speech, and they're so vague you don't even know you're not allowed to do, but that also implicates speech. So that's what the court held. But please understand that what that means is really not clear at this point. So, and I want to be clear, I'm not giving legal advice. I'm just offering a summary. That's where you all, if you're experiencing any, actions by the federal government on current grants or applications, that's where you're going to need to tell us what you're experiencing, and we're going to need to, be a place where you can find out information. A bit in the process of building that out still. So, like, just working this morning on, we need a website, that kind of thing. So in any case, those are the areas you should be watching for. So I'll note that. And the other thing I want to let this group know, because I suspect that a lot of people in this group are feeling this in this DEI context of, you're doing equity work. And so I wanted to let you know that this has been, you're certainly not alone. This is happening all across the country, and organizations are like, what do we do? Educational institutions. And, do we rename what we're doing, and all these sorts of questions. And to put a finer point on it, a lot of the work is, I'm not telling you guys anything you don't know, but just to put it in terms, is work to remove obstacles that are specifically experienced by certain groups, that is, people of color. So one case that was filed last week, it's the National Urban League is the first plaintiff on the case. So if you looked at, like, Just Security has a tracker, and if you looked at that to see what's happening with cases, you could look at the National Urban League case. In that case, the National Urban League and the other plaintiffs are represented by the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, which is super top drawer lawyers, as well as Covington and Burling. So super top drawer lawyers who really understand this area. And what they argued is that the attack on DEI is in itself race-based discrimination. That this is an effort to remove what specifically is protecting and advancing the interests of a group based on race. And I want to let you know that, because I found that to be just courageous and important. they just really put a stake in the ground and like this, let's just call this what it is. It is race-based discrimination by the administration. Just to track it as you read about it, that's in their claim for equal protection, which is, one of those civil rights eras, Reconstruction era amendments to the Constitution. And it's very, very core. It's that you can't treat people differently based on race. So I took, that was very helpful to me to see that. And so that'll be, that's an important case to follow. So I guess the last thing I would say is, as many of you can attend on March 4th, please do. That's the first installment in the work that we are creating along, like with others, mostly Nancy, you are just, I can't even tell you how lucky you are to have her in your corner. She is so smart and fast moving and unlike any other nonprofit person I've ever met. So you're really lucky. So with the Nonprofit Alliance and with support from Rhode Island Foundation, we're putting on this workshop. There's ongoing work too. And so if you miss this, don't despair. We have hired a firm from DC. This firm from DC is going to be presenting at the workshop to have an ongoing availability with both something called office hours and also to be on retainer for questions. And again, we're building that out, but there is going to be more available to nonprofits. So please watch for that. We will try to push out we'll try to push out where you can find out more information. And we're of course doing all of that with awareness of and connection to the organizations that are doing this big impact litigation. So Nancy, I don't know if that covers what you want.
Yeah, that's great. The litigation that Miriam was talking about, there's kind of two buckets of litigation. There's the DEI litigation, which there's two cases that have been filed, including the one she was talking about with the National Urban League. And then there is also the funding freeze litigation, where there's two cases there. One was filed by state attorneys general, including Attorney General Nerona, and then which has a temporary restraining order as a result of that. And then the National Council of Nonprofits just got a preliminary injunction yesterday for their lawsuit against the freeze. And both of those, and correct me if I'm wrong, Miriam, are really focused on the broad brush approach that the federal government has taken to this, so that there isn't any sort of targeting for specific reasons. It's really this blanket approach. And so that has been enjoined in both cases. The case from the attorneys general has also demonstrated that the federal government is not necessarily following through completely with the unfreezing of the funds. So it's really important for us to know if you experience any issues in funds that remain frozen, so that we can provide that information for both National Council of Nonprofits and the Attorney General's office, so that they can continue to litigate that in the process of these court cases. We're really grateful that Attorney General Nerona has been on the forefront of filing these legal challenges. He is going to speak at the March 4th workshop as well, but he has also released, in cooperation with other attorneys general, guidance about the legality of DEI initiatives, particularly in the areas of employment. And so that is in the Google document as well. It's called Multi-State Guidance on DEI, and it basically makes the case for the importance of that from an employment context. So for you as employers, that's really important. He doesn't get into the federal contracting component of DEI, but it's really valuable in terms of the issues that it's looking at. So please take a look at that, because he does make the case that this is legal activity. As long as you are not actively discriminating or preferencing in hiring decisions, which I assume you aren't, the idea of supporting and recruiting folks of color and providing supports to people across the diversity spectrum, that's really important and legal. And so I think that was important also to highlight. Does anyone, I know Miriam is not going to stay for the whole time, so I just wanted to give a couple minutes if people have questions for Miriam in particular. We're going to go over a bunch of other things, but if anyone has questions, I am clearly not a lawyer and I will not be dispensing legal advice. So if anyone had a question for Miriam.
I'm Courtney Bournes. I know we've been trying to catch up, Miriam. I'm with the Grantmakers Council of Rhode Island. I was just curious, what are the risks to a nonprofit who decides to be part of a legal case if their funding is cut off, or if it stays frozen, or a grant that had been contracted, it doesn't come through? Do you see risks of getting involved in a legal?
So I think there are a couple sort of categories. First of all, there's just the basic compliance that, you got to have all your ducks in a row, and you have to expect significant scrutiny, I think. So like really have all your ducks in a row. So there's that. There's the risk of asserting a claim like, we can have programs that are aimed at disadvantaged groups, or whatever language you want to use, right? Like you can make that claim, and is it possible that will be reversed? I guess it's, and then there's uncharted territory there, but that, I would have said, 6 months ago, I would have said like, the law's definitely on your side, but is there uncharted territory? Some, but there are lots and lots of organizations that are doing this. And also the other thing to keep in mind is that, any nonprofit that joins a suit, which I think was your question, like you're not going to be the first one in line, right? You're not going to be the first pin in the bowling ring.
Okay.
So there's that. As far as, are there other risks? I mean, this is beyond just like, well, there could be a decision that goes the other way. I mean, we all know that this is very much uncharted territory, and what might this administration do? I mean, that's out there, and that's, but I'm no more equipped to evaluate that than you are.
Yeah. Thank you.
But I do think there's strength in numbers, and yeah.
Appreciate all you're doing.
Likewise.
Any other questions for Miriam? So you're going to be hearing a lot more about the Alliance's partnership with the Lawyers Committee. We've been really grateful for some funding from the Bar Foundation to help get this off the ground. And we are going to be working on ongoing support for nonprofits navigating compliance issues as well as civil rights issues. And so if you have issues or questions, if you can reach out to me and we can make the connection with Miriam, it's important for us to know what things you're wrestling with so that we can strategize appropriately. And Miriam is in the process of recruiting pro bono lawyers, but we need to know what kinds of lawyers and what kinds of expertise are needed. So the more we know, we may not be able to address something immediately, but the more we know, the better we can recruit and strategize to meet those needs. So if you are having questions or issues, please let me know so that we can also create, if there's trainings that would be helpful about particular types of questions, or if we know that there are all these different boards that have different types of questions, then we could do a workshop that is targeted towards boards, or, you know, what are the questions that you're experiencing? Melissa?
Hi, Nancy. And maybe you all, maybe it's tied up in these diversity, equity, and inclusion suits, but I have read a little bit about the work to try to make the leap into impacting the private sector. So say you have a private foundation and their language is DEI or that type of thing. Is there any further information? There's this argument that that's impossible, you couldn't do that, but is that a possibility? So if you're kind of you working with a private foundation, could that impact your ability to access that funds if they don't meet criteria A, B, C, and D as is laid out in the executive order?
So let me make sure I understand your question. I think, so you're talking about affirmative enforcement actions by the administration not tied to grant funding.
Not tied to your direct grant funding, but if you're working with a funder,
Mm-hmm.
so I've read some information, and again, you always take it with a grain of salt,
Mm-hmm.
that they will try to have some overreach. And so when you sign with that particular organization or accept funds from that organization, if they don't meet, and you're a federally funded organization yourself, that there could create some problems there. If that entity, you're a federal fund receiver, you're working with a private organization that's providing you funds, and they don't meet some of these executive order criteria in that diversity and equity inclusion space.
Yeah, I haven't heard that, but you know, I do think that this administration is really driven to try all kinds of things. I don't know that, you know, I think the scenario you're setting up is a nonprofit gets, you know, gets a federal grant. There aren't issues with that grant, but you also get funding from a foundation. The administration has targeted that foundation, even though it's maybe has no federal nexus. It's just like a private company, basically. And so because you get some funding from that foundation, it could impact your separate receipt of federal grants. So I haven't heard that. I do know the administration is planning to go after private groups. You know, we've all heard, I think, you know, Find Nine. I don't know where that number comes from. Maybe one case for each of the Supreme Court judges. I don't know, justices. So yeah, I haven't heard that. It sounds somewhat attenuated to me, like not super likely. Yeah.
That's helpful because if you're going to receive federal funds and you want to run another program and sort of have the ability to deliver, let's just say care for certain populations that you might be discouraged from your federal dollars. So very helpful. Thank you.
Okay.
Well, I do think that there's a piece of what you're saying that they have been trying to address, which is in the lawsuits about there's the impact of directly federally funded programs. The first level, like the highest risk, is federally funded programs that include DEI in some component. But then the second piece is you're getting funding from the federal government for a program that doesn't involve DEI, but you do DEI. And does the certification request coming from the federal agency, are they asking you to certify that your entire organization has been wiped clean of DEI, even though the funding stream itself and the program that's being funded does not deal with DEI?
Yeah.
So that's being litigated in the lawsuits. So there's kind of the two streams there.
Yeah,
That's
they
a
don't want
really,
to be prohibited from taking funds from an organization. Is there a requirement, is your grant going to come down and say, hey, you can't do this and you can't contract or accept funds from any other? And I just didn't even know how much
yeah, again,
overreach they could have.
I haven't seen that happen. Like, you get funds from Soros. We hate Soros, so you can't, I mean, they're like
Yeah.
huge First Amendment problems with that, but might they do that? Sure. I think what Nancy's referring to is also something to flag, which is, the administration comes in and says, well, let's look at everything about you, like a financial audit and audit, of your employment policies. Oh, look, you go out and actively recruit in, you know, non-white communities or historic, whatever you want to call it, historically disadvantaged, whatever. And, that's a problem. I mean, yeah, I think that's probably coming. And I don't think, it's like our job to identify, to flag it, figure out what to do, and it's your job to let us know if you are starting to see that. But what I would urge is that before you try to figure out a way to game that, get legal advice either from the lawyers committee or someplace that's really been thinking about this for a while.
Yeah, just trying to be a little proactive to see what is even possible
Yeah.
legally. Is that possible? The movement into the private sector and to try to have some say over that feels like a lot of overreach.
Yeah. Yeah.
Any other questions for Miriam? Okay, Miriam, we will let you hop off. I know you have a lot of
Okay.
things on your plate, so
Sorry.
thank you.
Sorry to be a little bit late too. Yeah. Well, good to see all of you, and thank you for all that you're doing. And oh, one last thing. If you do send information to Nancy, like here's what we're experiencing, please label it privileged. Don't worry about what that means, or we're just trying to be as protective as possible. And we'll be, I think, probably putting some more structures in place to sort of take that and keep that information, as secure as possible. But and we're probably being overly paranoid, but that's the job of lawyers, is to think of the worst and plan for it. So I'm glad you don't have to live in that world, but we do. And so please just put privileged on anything that you send that describes what you're experiencing.
Excellent. Thank you, Miriam.
Okay, take care. Bye.
So I know that conversation itself was probably stressful to hear. And so we do want to make sure that you know that we are trying to stand up as much support as we can in moving forward with this partnership. So again, the more information that we know about what your issues are, the more helpful we will be able to be. Right now, there are, like Miriam said, there are 2 DEI lawsuits. One has a temporary restraining order that does apply nationally. So you should not be getting asked for certification that you're not doing DEI work from the federal government while that is in place. So please let us know if you do receive that. And there's a temporary restraining order on the Attorney General's funding freeze case, and there's a preliminary injunction in the National Council of Nonprofits federal funding case. So again, you should not be experiencing freezes on your funding. And if you are, please let us know. We're working closely with the Attorney General's office and the congressional delegation. And so it's important for us to be able to track those. There was also a very ambiguous executive order on reviewing funding for non-governmental organizations. It didn't say what they were looking for, but kind of putting it on the radar. And we don't know if that's related to international. They use the terms NGO, which is the international term for nonprofits. So it's unclear whether that focus is on kind of the foreign aid or whether that's domestic. But that is just to let you know that that is a relatively new executive order that they released. On the immigration front, there are lots of lawsuits happening around the executive orders around immigration. There is a temporary restraining order on the birthright citizenship executive order. The other important it's not an executive order, but the temporary protected status has now been ended for Venezuelans, effective April 7th. So if you work with folks who have TPS from Venezuela, that is going to be an issue. The temporary protective status for Haitians has been ended effective August 3rd. So if you work with folks from Haiti who have TPS, that will be an issue for them. Obviously, we don't want anyone to have to go back to the countries in those situations, but just to make you aware of that. Also, just to remind you that as you are thinking about your office space, ICE can enter any public space without a warrant. So any space that is open for clients or participants to come in, just any of the public to come in, that is legal for ICE to enter. So you probably want to think through your spaces and obviously we want our spaces to be welcoming to the community, but you may want to think about labeling things. If it says employees only, or if it says by appointment only, then you have the ability to say no to ICE unless they have a judicial warrant. Oftentimes they will have administrative warrants, which you can say no to. If they have a judicial warrant signed by a judge, then obviously they can come in. But that is something to keep in mind in your spaces. In case we are going to be doing some trainings for nonprofits and what you need to know about immigration, but that is a simple thing to be thinking about. On the LGBTQ plus executive orders, they have now prohibited gender identity questions on official federal forms, so that if you work with folks who identify in a different way, that is going to be an issue for them. They're not going to be able to get legal documents with their preferred identity. The State Department also just released a directive saying that they are not going to be issuing visas for international travelers wanting to come to the United States who do not have male-female documents, which seems like it would prohibit trans people from coming into the country. So I'm sure that's going to get litigated. But just an FYI that was just released in the last 2 days. The other component that's really important to have on your radar is the federal budget discussion. The House yesterday very narrowly passed a budget resolution, which is the first step in working. Now, right now, this is for the FY25 budget. So this is a budget that should have been passed in September. They've been working on a continuing resolution that expires March 14th. And the Republicans need to find money to pay for extending the Trump tax cut, which means they are looking for $4.5 trillion in savings, including a proposed cut of $880 billion to Medicaid. So almost $1 trillion to Medicaid cuts and $230 billion to SNAP. That is obviously concerning because we have so many programs beyond the individuals who receive medical care and food through those programs. Those programs also provide grants to nonprofits to provide services. So support for people with disabilities, targeted educational plans, employment and training comes through SNAP. All of that would be vulnerable to these enormous cuts. So the United Way Worldwide has an Action Center portal opportunity to email the congressional delegation to tell them not to cut Medicaid and SNAP. Our delegation has voiced support for Medicaid and SNAP and social service programs. They are not in the majority, so they don't have as much weight, but they do need to know how important these programs are. And so the link is in the document that Robin posted. The Charitable Act has been reintroduced in both the House and the Senate. That would reinstitute a universal charitable deduction, which is really, private donations are going to be really important with the severe cuts that we're going to be seeing on the state and federal levels. So it's important that you let our delegation know how important the universal charitable deduction is. On both of those, the budget and the Charitable Act, if you have colleagues, friends, family members, affiliates in other states, particularly in red states, it would be really helpful for you to get in touch with them to contact their representatives and senators, because they're the ones that really need to be convinced about this. So we encourage you to reach out to any connections you have in red states to talk about how important things like Medicaid and SNAP are to people in the community. United Way Worldwide is also doing a child tax credit week of action next week. And so there's a link in the document where you can send a letter about the child tax credit as well. Earmarks, which are congressionally directed spending applications, are now open on the Senate side and soon will be open on the House side. So if you are looking to have a request for congressionally directed spending, this is your time to get in touch. I know that Senator Whitehouse's application is public. I believe you can contact Senator Reed's office for information about that application, and the House application should be open soon. Last year, the House applications did not allow nonprofits to apply, which is infuriating, but we will let you know if those are open to nonprofits this year. And the thing to know is there's a long delay in receiving, even if they're approved, there's a long delay in receiving CDS funds. And we also don't know if they are going to be allowed in the budget because they are looking at so many budget cuts this year. So, but it is worth asking and applying if you are interested in that. On the state level, the State Department of Administration is urging nonprofits who receive federal pass-through funds. So you're getting funding that originated at HUD, but it's coming through the state. Please submit your expenses for reimbursement ASAP for February, because of the potential of a shutdown of the federal government. The deadline for them to have an agreement is March 14th. The leaders in both parties are saying that they have rough agreement on kind of the overall numbers for the budget, but the Democrats want to have assurances that the president and the executive branch are not going to withhold money that is approved by Congress as a stipulation, and the Republicans have said that that's a line that they're not going to cross. So we may be seeing a stalemate. So it's really important for you to process your reimbursements ASAP for February. We also sent a sign-on letter to the governor and the director of DOA requesting to expedite nonprofit contracts and reimbursement. And they are having discussions about that. I have met with the director of purchasing and the grants management office, And there are discussions about decreased terms. Right now it's 30 days to get paid. They're having discussions about whether they could decrease that amount. But it is really important for us to know where your pain points are in state contracting and reimbursement so that we can address them. So there is a link on the document that you can give input about where your particular pain points are with contracting and reimbursement so that we can try and address some of those bottlenecks. We also have a link for any questions or concerns about the executive orders or other federal actions, so you can let us know through the link as well. On the state level advocacy, we have submitted bills in the General Assembly, House and Senate, seeking to increase the audit threshold for nonprofits. Currently, it's $500,000 you're required to submit an audit. We are seeking to increase it to $1 million to match the federal level. And so we are looking for organizations with annual revenues from $400,000 to $1 million who would be affected by this legislation to help in advocacy. So if you are one of those organizations, we would love to hear from you. And we are also going to be doing a advocacy campaign focused on urging our state legislators to prioritize social services as they develop the budget for this year. We know that there is a projected budget deficit of over $200 million, and we don't want to see the state budget get balanced on the backs of the most vulnerable Rhode Islanders. So we will be getting information out about that in the next week, and would love to have you share that with your network so that all legislators within the General Assembly will hear from constituents who want them to protect social services in the budget. We do know that 33% of the state budget is federal funds. And so if there are significant cuts on the federal level, they will be scrambling on a state level. There is no backstop, the governor has said, to the potential of losing that federal funding. So there is also an effort by Revenue for Rhode Island to increase tax revenue by increasing taxes on the most wealthy individuals in Rhode Island. So we will also be sharing information from Revenue for Rhode Island in case anyone is interested in being a part of that effort as well, because there is not additional state funding available to backstop some of these things. So we're going to need to look for additional sources of revenue. We are going to continue to do biweekly briefings, and but if there are specific topics that would be helpful for you on other content, we are doing monthly fundraising learning sessions. We are starting a grant writing training cohort. We are going to be having some specific targeted work around kind of the fiscal cliff that everyone is experiencing. So what are the potential pathways that you can take to get out of, to create sustainability? So earned revenue, strategic alliances, additional fundraising events, and additional collaboration spaces, because we are entering a resource constrained environment and need to look at how we can do things differently. And so we're going to have some opportunities for that as well.